what's up, guys? We out here. This is Maylee Tao, your Donut Princess, and you're listening to Short and Sweet, a Donut Princess podcast. Today, I have Iman here, and she, to me, is a very inspiring individual who is balancing both full-time a job as well as working on her book. And, I think we both share this amazing pivot towards, really highlighting immigrant stories and the conversations around identity. But without further ado, Iman, tell us a little bit about you before we begin. Like, where are you working now? What's your background? And how did you kind of start on working this book?
Yeah. Well, my background, first of all, I just wanted to say thank you for having me and for those kind words. It's always surreal to hear how you come across to other people. So I appreciate that. My background, I've always been a writer and always known I've wanted to write in some capacity. I started freelance writing when I was 14, 15 in high school. I pitched an op-ed about my experience with Islamophobia in a post 9/11 New York to HuffPost Teen, which I don't think exists anymore, but at the time was a really great opportunity for young people to experience being edited and to elevate their voices. And I was really excited when it was published, and freelancing just took off from there for me. A lot of pitching, a lot of no's, a lot of no responses, but slowly over time, I started to build my portfolio. I studied creative writing in school, and when I graduated, immediately started working in New York media. I've held jobs at Teen Vogue, Bustle Daily. I'm now the deputy editor of her campus. And while my background is in a sex and relationship space, I am now thinking of myself as being fully immersed in Gen Z content and culture, which has always been a passion of mine because I'm obsessed with adolescence and puberty and coming of age. And my debut novel, 100 Other Girls, which Maylee mentioned, is going to be coming out in August 9th. It's a new adult novel. And I really think that even though, it's a pivot from what I do in my day-to-day, it's an extension of all the work that I've been doing since I was 14, 15, because it explores identity. It explores coming of age in your 20s. It explores the dynamics between families and friendships when you're navigating things like workplace tension and dream jobs and trying to figure out who you are separate from what you do. So even though on paper it looks like a pivot, it truly, I think of everything that I do as like one entangled web. And I'm really excited to share it with you guys.
Oh my gosh. And so 100 Other Girls, could you explain to me, what section is it in when you can find it in the library or in the bookstore, or is it online only? Like, how did you choose the cover? Like, walk me through a little bit of the process of that.
Yeah, of course. So the book is upmarket women's fiction. And when I first entered publishing, I really hated that term, women's fiction, the idea that fiction needed to be gendered. But I think the reason that women's fiction is so important is because women aren't always written into certain spaces, and there isn't always content that's specifically engineered from the female gaze. And I've come to really love that I exist and add to that space. And it's going to be published in mass paperback. You can buy it in your local Barnes & Noble. You can buy it in Target. You can buy it online, pre-order if you can. Pre-orders make a huge difference to the success of a book. You can pre-order from Barnes & Noble, from Amazon, although, F Jeff Bezos. So if you are pre-ordering, I'd encourage pre-ordering from an indie, but I'm really excited to have that experience of walking into my local bookstore and seeing it in person on a bookshelf for the first time. That's still something that I romanticize in my head. I've got a whole box of advanced reader copies here, and it's surreal to be able to handle, just hold it and to give it out to friends and family and reviewers. But buying it for the first time, returning that money to myself, hopefully, is going to be a game changer. And the cover, it's interesting enough. The cover was probably the longest process of publishing for me. I worked with my publisher, Sourcebooks, on the concept and explained to them covers within my genre that I feel compelled to buy and inspired by. And what I really love about Sourcebooks is that they take a really strategic numbers approach towards everything from the title to the cover. So they really want to make sure that based on like focus group testing, that any cover that they're shown has the potential to sell a certain amount of copies.
Right.
So the first time I was presented with a cover, I didn't feel like it fully encapsulated the spirit and the energy of the book. Mm-hmm. And I was so nervous about it. I spoke to my agent, I spoke to my editor about pushing back because I didn't want to come across as ungrateful or pushy. And I didn't want to create any tension with my publisher who had been so wonderful to me up until that point. And they encouraged me to just articulate what I'm looking for and my issues with the cover. And my publisher was super wonderful. I worked with the design team. We hired a new designer. She's a woman of color. She's worked on some of my favorite books, which was, again, so exciting. And together we came up with the concept for 100 Other Girls, which I really wanted to sort of be a nod to like the exodus from hustle culture in New York City. I wanted it to have like a big media feel. I wanted it to be colorful and contemporary. And I absolutely love what we came up with. It delayed the process of the book coming out by about 3 months. It was originally supposed to come out in April and it was pushed to August. But I have to tell you, I'm so glad I decided to remain patient. And this is my debut. I wanted to do it right. And I wanted the book to really, I wanted the cover to really reflect the heart of the book and the characters and the color within it. So I'm really excited. And if you guys see it, check it out. Let me know what you think. I'm obsessed, but always love to hear readers' thoughts too.
Oh, I love the thought that's been put into the cover and also this whole pushback too. It's like, I definitely give you a lot of kudos for speaking up and being like this isn't quite it. You had the power and the courage to be like, this is my debut, like the other cover is cool, but let's really make it so that it matches the energy of the book. I think that when people are thinking about, writing a book, there's this idea that they will have full control, but there are definitely a few different ways to go about it now. That's if you go with, a publisher and an agent, and, an editor. But for someone who, let's just say is self-publishing, can you share some of the things that you learned in the process while working with an agent, and why, would you go with an agent or self-publish like for your second book?
So first of all, I just wanted to say that I think self-publishing and traditional publishing, they're two completely equal routes that are both unbelievably valid and have, I think, pros and cons to both of them. I think that indie publishing has never been as legitimized and recognized as it is now. And I also think the publishing industry has changed dramatically since the start of the pandemic. And I think communities like the Book Talk community on TikTok are changing the game in terms of visibility for indie authors, and also the potential to sell big and to spread the word through organic word of mouth marketing. So I definitely think that the way that I approach indie publishing has changed so much since I started this process, which I wrote this book I finished it in late 2019. And, at that time, this community didn't exist. So definitely would encourage people to seriously consider indie publishing. I think that there are strengths to indie publishing in that you do have more creative control. You hire the designer, you dictate what goes on the cover, you dictate how your story is told, you dictate the marketing and distribution. You are also, huge plus, you are reaping all the rewards. You're getting the proceeds. You don't have to give a cut to anyone. I sold my book, which means I got an advance, which is then paid out in certain installments. But, that advance, again, a percentage of it has to go to my agents. And then, the rights are sold through my agents or through my publisher, depending on the region. Additionally, like in order for me to start gaining royalties, so not even like proceeds of the book, or proceeds is the wrong word, but the profits of the book, I first have to earn out my advance, which is something that I think a lot of people maybe don't realize. So earning out the advance will then allow me to start getting royalties. But I think people have this a misconception that like traditional publishing or big five publishing means that you're going to automatically be bringing in more money because of the like heightened visibility. And that certainly is not the case. I know a ton of people that have signed with traditional publishers or big five publishers who then, because they're one of like so many authors, don't get a ton of support or have bad experiences with their editors or marketing teams. So I want to say right off the bat, there can be huge pluses to indie publishing. I decided to go the traditional publishing route for several reasons. One was that I work a full-time job and I didn't have like the time and knowledge to really put into self-publishing my book, doing all of the marketing for my book, basically running the business that would have just been me. Yeah. As an author, because that's what it is. The second that you self-publish a book, even if you go the traditional publishing route, you are your own company, you are your own business. You're basically starting a startup and you are the startup. So that the concept of that in 2019, when I was a sex and relationships editor, I was working full days, and I was also freelance writing. It was daunting and I didn't know where to get started. Mm-hmm. And I thought to myself, I need help. Like I need assistance. I don't know what the next step is. Having an agent has been wonderful because she is an expert in her field who is able to like walk me through certain processes, is able to get me legal help, is able to help me with contractual things, to negotiate on my behalf. And to me, that was really appealing because again, like I didn't have the expertise or the time to become an expert.
Yeah.
So I was really grateful for that. And then I have gotten really lucky with my experience with my publisher. I had a wonderful editor who really understood the concept for the book from that very first phone call. She's been super hands-on from the beginning. I never felt like I had to wait very long for feedback or for an email from her edits. The editing process was wonderful. And I've been really impressed by the way that my publisher Sourcebooks has advocated for me and given me opportunities to speak to booksellers and librarians. And again, like heard me out. My feedback of the cover has presented me with a great marketing plan. So I had a really great experience. I've had a very great experience with traditional publishing, but I think that not every experience is like this. I think that there's different reasons why this was the case. One is that Sourcebooks is technically an independent publisher. It's the largest independent publisher and it's woman owned, which is amazing. But so which means like I'm a bigger fish in a smaller pond. I've been able to gain all these attention and resources from the publisher. But additionally, like the distribution is they're 45% owned by Penguin Random House. So they have the distribution capabilities of a big five, which is for me, ideal. Some people, might want more things in-house, which means a smaller publisher wouldn't, fit what they're looking for. So again, there is no right path. There is no one way to publish a book. And again, I want to emphasize that because of communities like Book Talk and Bookstagrammers, it has never been easier for you to self-publish a book and get the word out if you're willing to put the work into it. But I mean, let's talk about how Colleen Hoover, who self-published most of her books, especially at the beginning of her career, had, I think, 6 New York Times bestsellers at the exact same time, all of which had been published 5-10 years ago, all because of the Book Talk community blowing up her books. Let's talk about, the Spanish Love Deception, which is, I think, like a 400, 500 page romance book, self-published originally by Elena Armas, which not only hit the New York Times bestseller list, but led to her getting an offer for a reprint by a traditional publisher. And she's now coming out with a second book from Atria. These stories blow my mind. Like, they truly give me so much, like, you never could have imagined that a book that was just, through sheer will promoted and passed on from people who love it and who only promote it because they truly loved it so much that they think their friends and family should read it too. It was unheard of that something like that could become a bestseller and sell so many copies. There are so many traditional published books that put so much money behind them and they still don't sell as much as these word of mouth book talk community books. So again, big fan of self-publishing. Didn't make sense for me at the time, but 100% would encourage people to look into it and try it in the future. But I've had a great experience with my traditional publisher, and I'm definitely excited to continue working with them.
Thank you so much for sharing so in depth, from your specific view of like, yes, you can go either which way, depending on what makes sense for you, what your schedule is like, what your commitment is like. But, you bring up a good point. It is a business, even if you do sign with, a big 5 publisher or, you go that route, there's still so much work that you have to do as a business, as an author to promote the book. And like, I think, with the whole TikTok and social media, how you can, again, promote these books, these success stories are so cool that you shared with me that these people are just promoting from their platforms and gaining popularity that way. I mean, it just shows we're in such a different world now of like, you don't have to get it in front of like a big 5 publisher. You can go ahead and promote it on TikTok and bring up these topics of the book that people actually really care about that doesn't need to go through this whole thing. So thank you for sharing that. I think that's super, like informative for people, especially, we're really gearing this episode towards people who, have that inkling of a thought of like, I want to start to write a book and they don't know where to start. And I think that we've all been there. What would you say is your favorite and least favorite part of writing your first book?
Well, first, I just wanted to say I knew nothing about publishing before I wrote a book. Even now, I feel like day to day, I'm learning so much.
Yeah.
And I wish that someone had just been sort of upfront and frank with me about these weird intricacies of the industry. Yeah. So I'm happy to go super in depth. Yes, I agree that marketing is almost like being an author is its own full-time job. And as I get closer and closer to the book coming out and I'm straddling, working on my next project, promoting this book, working a full-time as an editor and freelance writing, I'm like, God, I must like to put myself through the ringer because it is so much work, and consistency is really key when it comes to getting your name out there. But I just wanted to share a story. I joined TikTok in maybe early 2021 as a reader because whenever I'm not writing, I'm reading. One interest, one talent, and I immediately felt really inspired by the community and started making videos about the process of writing the book, of selling the book, just sort of talking about, the ins and outs of publishing in a way that I wish I had access to when I first wrote the book. And when the book finally went on NetGalley, which is a site that connects advanced readers with ARCs so that they can write reviews and pass on recommendations to friends, etc. NetGalley posted something on Instagram that was like books coming to NetGalley in February. And obviously, nobody knows, this is my first book. No one knows who I am. My book wasn't like featured in the photo or there was no mention of my name, but I scrolled to the comments and there were multiple comments saying just requested 100 Other Girls by Iman Hariri-Kia, like been following her on TikTok for like community members just showing up. And that meant so much to me. And it reminds me that like making connections with people through shared interests and also just like personal, your personality, that vulnerability is so key. And yeah, it's been really amazing. Sorry, I didn't answer your question, but my favorite part of writing a book has definitely been, God, it's actually hard to pick. I was going to say connecting with readers, but that's always my favorite part of writing is connecting with readers because it reminds you that like that art is this like living, breathing thing that once you finish it and release it, it exists in different capacities for different people. And I've always loved the community part of writing. It's always been really special to me. So connecting with readers has been amazing, but also I would just say seeing the process of growing the concept for a book from a seed into a full grown, tree, like that has been being able to go through my notes app and seeing in, August of 2019, random ramblings about a concept for the book, the plot being written out in between meetings or after a yoga class or after taking a shower. And then being able to connect those dots and see how they all came together in the final manuscript. That has just been, it must be what it's like to watch like a child grow up. It feels like I'm watching this small thing that I gave life to just take on a life of its own. And it's really powerful. Sorry, that was not eloquent at all. And I promise my writing in the book is much more eloquent, but it's difficult for me to explain because I'm still sort of like in the thick of it.
Right.
And every time I get an update on the final book and the final manuscript, second pages are done and it's going to print. I go back to my original manuscript from 2019 and I look at what it was and what it is now. And I feel like this sort of out of body elation that I was able to breathe life into something that is going to now live on its own and be sort of like its own artifact, which is amazing. I'd say my least favorite part of writing the book, I really struggled during submission, which basically is when your agent takes your revised book and pitches it to different publishers. And that wasn't because the submission process went poorly for me. In my mind, it lasted 6 months. I went back in time and apparently it only lasted 1 month, but it was really scary for me to take something that I'd put in like 1.5 years, 2 years of my life into working on, and then just wait for people to say yes or no. It was just, I've never felt so naked. And I was just really internalizing every no and doing everything that I would tell new authors not to do. Every piece of advice that I give writers when they start out their career, it flew out the window and self-doubt started to creep in. And looking back, I think that that's something that I also experienced a little bit when the book first went on, Goodreads and started getting reviews. And it would be like for every 10 good reviews, I would ignore them all in favor of one like 2-star review. And my biggest takeaway from submission and reviews and basically just internalizing negative feedback about your writing is that you have to be honest with yourself about what you can handle. I've heard a lot of people say, grow thicker skin, like get over it. I don't know. I kind of think that like being vulnerable and emotional is like a strength of a writer that makes your writing better. So I wouldn't say you have to build a bridge and get over it, but get better at setting boundaries for yourself and recognizing what you can and can't handle. For submission, Obviously, like my next submission is much easier because I already had a publisher, but I've now learned, like I told my agent, I don't want to, you can tell me if there's a yes or a no, but like I don't need to read the specific reasons why someone passed. Like protect me from that. I don't want to, I want to draw this boundary so that I, can protect my own mental health and also remain positive and confident in the project. And when it comes to reviews, this is going to sound silly, but my partner basically sat me down and had me child lock sites like Goodreads so that every time I go to them, it says like, this is actually restricted. Are you sure you want to read them? Because ultimately, your favorite book in the world, the one that you'll reread 10 times, it's your comfort book, has a million bad reviews that you would disagree with. Some of the best books of all time, which have won Pulitzers and, are highly regarded, have 1-star reviews. So you're not doing anyone any favors when you let the negativity start to spread like a virus, and setting that boundary saying, hey, like, I can't handle reading this today. If anyone has like constructive criticism, like they'll bring it to me, they'll bring it to my agent who will bring it to me. There are processes in place to make sure that I get feedback. I don't need to seek out, negativity. So learning to set boundaries has been key for me, and it's still an ongoing process, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just what you've shortly shared sounds super emotional. You're going through not only like the submissions part where you're kind of like on your toes, but, after when the reviews come out, you're setting boundaries. And I think, kudos to you again for really being mindful of like, hey, okay, I need to set a boundary here. Like, I don't need to go down that spiral because, even with any industry, I owned the donut shop with my parents for, we owned it for a total of 40 years. And no matter how much amazing work you put into it, no matter if it's 99% of people who love your store and love your donuts, there's still going to be that 1% that is, no matter what, 1-star or a 2-star. And, like I can definitely resonate with you. It's like that one thing just like pulls you down and you start ignoring all the work, all the time, all the dedication that you've done, and you focus on this one negative thing. So I think, to set boundaries is a great coping mechanism. And I think you've been very strategic in handling all the emotions that have been coming up when you've been writing the book. And it's very mature to me also, like how you've, figured it out along the way. When I talk to a lot of authors, this quarter, my emphasis of my podcast was on authors. And what I found was it's just like, there's a lot of stuff that you just like learn along the way. Even with like publishing, like the whole, like even publishing section, if you do decide to work with a publisher and an agent, that in itself is, it's a binding contract, like there are certain like words in the contract you sign where it's like, even after this book comes to life, like, are you in control with other things as well? So I think you've done a great job with like channeling your emotions. And another thing that you shared with your community of like, creating your own community where people are like vouching for you. And these are people that you may or may not have ever seen in real life. And it just goes to show like, the internet is such a powerful tool that you can connect on like a global scale of like people that you again might never meet, but will resonate so strongly with how you share and the story that you share, that sometimes that's all that matters. When you see that comment of like the person being like, excuse me, I'm requesting 100 other girls, you're like, wow, like how, like this is so cool. And like, just to see the support that you've been getting for this book is pretty cool. I do want to talk about, the meat of the book, right? Like if you could give us a little bit about what your experience was like writing from your own point of view and why you chose this subject to write about for your debut book.
Of course. So the book is 100% fictional. It's definitely not there isn't a single character, I'd say, who's 100% based on anyone that I know in real life, but it was important for me to write like an own voices book, which means I was writing from the perspective of an Iranian American. I'm Iranian American, and to really write a story where a Middle Eastern protagonist is making like messy life decisions and is just trying her best, because I think so often representation, specifically for Middle Eastern people, it really, really either centers religious or cultural trauma, or their characters' plot and arc is 100% driven by some sort of religious or cultural trauma. And I really wanted this story to feel representative of, the multifaceted experience of being a Middle Eastern immigrant, and not necessarily like riddled with tropes and tokenization. So that was super important to me. And there's a lot of representation throughout the book for a lot of different communities. And again, like this, it was just so key to me to paint the world of New York City and also New York media the way that I've experienced it myself, which is full of rich diversity, and not to have there be one token queer friend or one token person of color who comes in and counsels Nora. I wanted everyone to feel like fully formed characters whose, race, cultural background, sexuality, gender identity didn't necessarily define the character, but who were able to take on lives of their own and have their own motivations and character arcs. So that was really important to me when I sat down to write the book. The meat of the book is about New York media. I like to think of it as like a contemporary Devil Wears Prada that explores topics like identity exploitation and cancel culture and clickbait and content mills. It really, I think, toes the line in discussing the rise of digital media and the decline of the publishing industry. I realized that there hadn't been someone to successfully talk about this since The Devil Wears Prada, which predates digital publishing altogether.
Yeah.
So the crux of the book is that it follows a young post-grad named Nora who is having trouble finding work and is an aspiring writer, sort of crashing with her sister, tutoring kids, trying to figure it all out, when she gets the opportunity to apply for an entry-level position at a magazine called Vinyl. And Vinyl is essentially like a culture magazine, not necessarily a fashion magazine, that was really thought of as feminist and edgy and political, but in an era that predates Nora. So she grew up with this magazine, but maybe its thumb isn't necessarily on the pulse of things anymore. Mm-hmm. She gets there and she quickly realizes that there is tension between the old school, somewhat elitist, traditional print team and the cool, young, woke, for all the wrong reasons, digital team. And the further that she gets involved in this tension, she realizes that there's a real conflict there, and she gets caught in the middle. Mm. So she basically needs to decide which team she's going to side with, or if she can form her own side. And it's, I think, a really compelling story of what it's like to chase a dream only to realize that the reality isn't exactly what you had pictured. It also gets at the heart of what it is like to have these generational conflicts in so many different industries. And I think pairing, well-seasoned professionals who have worked and grinded and done everything that they can from when they first graduated school, who are now high up and have decision-making power, pairing, but don't really understand online culture and like new technology and, the pivot away from capitalism and toward, not loving to work and working to love. So with young people who are whip smart, have been like publishing online since they first got access to a computer, who have a million opinions all the time, but don't necessarily have that experience. Yeah. I think it creates like a really, really beautiful, like hilarious and thoughtful color. And I really hope that people pre-order the book and enjoy it.
Oh man, thank you for sharing all of that. And it's a very unique type of viewpoint. I love the themes that you brought up. And I guess when you were telling me this, I was like, so did your parents have anything to do to inspire any of this, of the subjects of your book?
The parents are very sad that the parent characters in the book are not in that I wrote them out of the book. Nora has a sister, and the sister relationship there is very key to the book. The sister dynamic is, it was really important to me to explore what it's like to share the experience of being a first generation American with only very few people. And I think that like your sister, your siblings are sometimes the only people that will understand exactly what it's like from your POV. And I really wanted to capture that. So I focused a lot on sibling dynamics. Mm-hmm. The parents in the book live in Dubai, and I decided to do that just because I really wanted to focus on Nora grappling with sort of being between two different cultures and two different places in their life. And I think it would have been challenging to do that in a world where she's constantly being influenced or pressured or judged by her parents.
Right.
And also because I love found family, and I wanted to give Nora the opportunity to find her own family in post-grad coming of age in your 20s. So, but my parents inspire a lot of what I do. And I will say that the greatest gift they ever gave me is that they never discouraged any of my creative inclinations, but which I think is really rare, especially for first generation kids. And I think that's because my mother isn't a traditional Iranian woman. She is an architect, and she co-founded an architecture firm with her sister. So I've always been really inspired by the work she does, and also really inspired by her passion and her ability to remain optimistic and, to love what she does, despite the fact that like all creative fields are unbelievably tumultuous.
Yeah, I love that. And it's like, I guess you can only imagine maybe what she went through with her parents of like choosing an occupation that wasn't like, a doctor, a lawyer, a dentist or whatever. And so maybe she cut you a little bit of slack and been like, okay, this is America. You go and do your creative thing. I know you'll be fine. So I love how you kept it so that, the characters are in Dubai. It's therefore giving the main character, more range, more freedom. Whereas, I'm a first generation American here, and, my mom is very close by. So I feel a lot of influence from her of like, old school values and things like that. But, it goes to show that at least you still have the basis of like bringing it back to family and bringing it back to exploration and, letting your main character have this cool identity exploitation of her own. What do you think young readers will see themselves in the most, like the themes that young readers will see themselves in the most in your book?
Oh, that is such a great question. I definitely don't get me wrong. I definitely get the doctor, lawyer, scientist pressure from my grandparents who are very Persian and luckily still are alive and still are there to give that slack to my sister. My sister is a model, and they still think she's going to work for the IMF one of these days. So I'll put that out there. I think there are a lot of themes that young readers are going to really cling on to here. But I think the biggest one is what it means to have a dream job and whether a dream job truly exists. And also this idea that you are not defined by your work, you exist outside of your productivity, and that there are people that are going to love who you are and support you outside of like the companies that you're connected to and the work that you're constantly producing. And I think that that is such a central theme, right down to the title of the book, which is 100 Other Girls, which is derived from this idea that there are 100 other girls just waiting to take your place the second that you have had enough in any industry. And that's something that I think was really drilled into me when I started working in media at the beginning, that I should be grateful, even if I'm mistreated, even if I feel burnt out, to have an opportunity that is like, that is making me feel burnt out. And it leads to this really toxic work culture where you allow yourself to, push past your boundaries because you're so worried that like you are replaceable and that you won't matter without this opportunity. And I really think that the book explores the worst case scenario there of that question. And the takeaway, I think, will be really inspiring. And my intention is hopeful for young readers.
Oh my gosh. And I just love this whole like new age, like Gen Z, like energy into all of it. And really like being like, these are new times. Like you can chase after your dreams and really highlighting the things that come within that. So I can't wait to read it. I didn't get to read it before our podcast, but I definitely can't wait to read it. So before I let you go, this is my favorite part of my podcast where we share golden nuggets. And these golden nuggets are meant to be like, okay, you've listened to the podcast, you've listened to her story. Now, if you are a person you're writing a story in your head, what are some golden nuggets that you can share on how people can get started, or even pieces of advice? Go ahead.
My number one piece of advice for anyone who wants to write a book or publish a book or just have a manuscript under their pillow one day: finish your draft. I know that this is the most annoying piece of advice and nobody wants to hear it, and you're probably turning off the podcast hearing this. The hardest part of writing a book is finishing that first draft. Even if you're writing it and you start to get the ick, even if you're writing it and you're like, I don't know if this plot actually makes sense anymore, or the characters are disagreeing with me, or the whole story has run away from me, force yourself to finish a draft, because you can't edit what's not there. Force yourself to finish a draft, take some time away from it, read it with fresh eyes. You don't even have to edit it on your first pass. Write down things you notice, write down questions you have. And then once you actually feel like you're back in control, you can return to it. But you're never going to write a book if you don't force yourself to finish that draft. So that's my number one piece of advice to all writers. It sounds so simple, but it actually is the most difficult part of writing, is forcing yourself to see your writing through. So that would be my number one golden nugget. And then remember that writing still has value. The world needs more writers. The world will always need storytellers. I fully believe that like the greatest gift you can give is telling a story, because through vulnerable storytelling, you cause people to feel similar emotions. That emotion can actually lead people to enact actionable change. There's a through line between action and feeling, and storytelling through art, through different forms of media, is the only way to get people to feel. So the world needs more storytellers. The world needs more writers. Don't be discouraged from writing, and finish that draft.
Thank you, Iman, for paving the way for this next generation. When we look in 20 years, when it's I don't know what they're going to call this next generation.
Beta after alpha, maybe?
Gen beta. Yeah, maybe it's beta. They're going to look back at your piece of art, at your book, and, really feel inspired and hopefully, like you said, actionable change, so that we can achieve a world where there is more understanding for one another. There is more compassion, and that, it might just change the way that one person views a perspective. And sometimes like that's all you need. And so how can people find you and also your TikTok and follow along on your journey? And, in August when it comes out, how can people stay in touch with you?
Thank you so much. That is so kind. Honestly, it makes me emotional just to hear that. So thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to just shoot the shit, talk about publishing process, talk about my baby and my projects. And this has been incredible. You can connect with me at Iman Hariri-Kia on Instagram, on TikTok. I'm not on Twitter because, again, drawing boundaries for my own mental health. But I would love to chat with you, answer more in-depth questions about my publishing process and your publishing process, give any writing or editing advice. I work 9 to 5 as a professional editor, so I didn't even talk that much about it, but it's a big part of what I do. I would love to stay in touch. So please don't hesitate to follow or DM me. And this has been amazing.
Thank you, Iman, for making the time to inspire the next generation and to be an amazing storyteller. Thank you guys so much for listening to a short and sweet, A Donor Princess podcast. Until next time, holla at your girl.